So the image on the screen here, and I mean there's a variety of things happening here. Every one of these is explaining what happens during one menstrual cycle. All right, and one menstrual cycle is on average, and it's an average, so it's not the same for everyone, but it's on average about 28 or so days. Okay? We start the actual cycle at the beginning of menstruation or the flow phase. And what ends up happening here, and you can see this from the bottom part here, this bottom section, is actually showing you the endometrium. So the endometrium starts off really thick, and by the end of your flow phase, it's literally non-existent. And what ends up happening here, and we remember from last year, the endometrium is soft tissue. It's got a lot of blood vessels in it. Okay, and that is going to house a prospective fertilized embryo. Right? That's where the embryo is going to grow, and the placenta will grow from that, and the umbilical cord, and all that stuff. But we don't maintain that. We don't just end up, when we start puberty, we don't end up with one endometrium and say, okay, there you go, you're good until you have a kid. You're going to keep the same endometrium. It's not very viable to keep that tissue there. All right, it starts to degrade if an embryo doesn't implant. If it starts to degrade, it can lead to infection. So the body prevents that by getting rid of it. And it takes about 5 days or so, on average, to get rid of the old endometrium. And if you've started menstruating, you'll know that the actual menstrual cycle, when you're bleeding, let's say, it doesn't look like when you would cut your finger or when you would get a nosebleed. It's not the same thing. That's because the tissue is broken down. If ever you've cut your finger and you've let the blood dry, you'll notice that it turns a lot darker. It's almost like a maroon color. Okay? It's old, degraded blood cells. All right? That is what your body's getting rid of, that tissue. Okay, it's not full-on liquid because it's a semi-solid tissue. And your body has to get rid of that. Okay, so this is what's happening during this actual phase. It takes about, if let's say this is day 1 here, this is about day 5 of the actual 28-day cycle. And in that time, your ovaries, whether it's the right one or the left one in your body, one actual follicle cell is being, I guess for lack of a better word, chosen, and it will undergo meiosis. As menstruation occurs, things inside the actual reproductive system start to kind of get ready to begin the cycle again. We'll see that FSH, and you always have a very small amount of FSH in the body, FSH kind of has a little bit of a blip here, a very small little amount right here. Do you see that? Okay, and what's going to happen here is a little amount of FSH is going to be increased, and that's going to stimulate the ovary. It's going to say, ovary, get ready. Pick a cell, pick a follicle, because we're getting started. It needs that small little increase in order to wake the ovary up, in order to pick a follicle cell and to stimulate that follicle. And we'll see, okay, that the levels in the first half of the menstrual cycle of follicle stimulating hormone are higher than the levels in the second half of the cycle. Because, listen to the words, follicle stimulating hormone. By the time ovulation occurs, that follicle better be grown. Otherwise, what's the point of ovulating? You're going to have nothing to ovulate. Okay? So FSH levels are higher in the first half, in the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle. The next hormone I want to talk to you about is one of the main female hormones. It's what makes you a girl. Okay? Not only in your physical body, but also in your body structure and in certain behaviors. All right? And that is estrogen. You'll notice here estrogen is in blue. All right? Estrogen, nice light blue here. What ends up happening here, estrogen has two roles. Its first role is to stimulate the growth of new endometrium. So you'll notice here, as the endometrium rises, it gets thicker and thicker. Well, estrogen levels rise. They get higher and higher. That's because one of the jobs of estrogen is to make the endometrium. Okay? The second job of estrogen is to continuously help the follicle develop. So as the follicle gets bigger and bigger and bigger, estrogen levels are rising, rising, and rising. Okay? Until the follicle cell is ready to go. Until inside the follicle cell you have a fully undergone meiosis 1, meiosis 2 ovum. All right? That ovum only has a short lifespan. It's got anywhere from about 10 to 24 hours in order to get fertilized. Otherwise, it just dies. It shuts off. Even if it comes into contact with sperm cells later on, after that window, doesn't matter. Fertilization will not occur. Okay? Now, right before the ovary is ready to get rid of that ovum, another pituitary hormone spikes. This one is called LH, luteinizing hormone. And you'll notice that its levels are always fairly low until right before the midway through the actual cycle. Right before ovulation, we see a large spike in LH. If you go to the pharmacy, you can often find ovulation indicators. Women who are trying to naturally get pregnant, and I think it's safe to say that we all know if you want to get pregnant, you need to have sexual intercourse in and around ovulation. Okay? You have sex earlier on, the ovum won't be there. All right? And sperm cells can live maybe about 72 hours inside the female body. Otherwise, they break down and die. So if you're going to try and have a child, you want to try and have sexual intercourse in and around ovulation. And women who are trying to get pregnant will actually, very similar to a home pregnancy test, an ovulation test is a dipstick. Okay? It's something that you put in your pee, and excess LH hormone, is secreted in the urine. So if you pee on it, it'll turn a specific color to tell you how much LH is in your system. You'll see a huge LH spike right before ovulation, because LH's job is to say, okay, get rid of the egg so that we can start making progesterone. Okay? And you can only start making progesterone when the egg's gone, when the egg is out of the ovary. Because what happens inside this actual opening here? Okay, as soon as the actual egg is kicked out, see you later, off to the fallopian tube you go, inside that actual hollow chamber where the egg was, it kind of fills itself with this spongy kind of yellow sort of material. Okay, I always think it kind of looks like a piece of pineapple, personally. You'll never look at pineapple the same way again. Okay, and this substance is called corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum's job is to secrete the second of the female hormones. Its job is to secrete progesterone. Okay, if we look at this, as soon as the corpus luteum gets larger, levels of progesterone skyrocket. Okay? When the corpus luteum is at its largest, progesterone levels are at their highest. Do you see that? Do you see the link there? Now, here's the deal though. Have a look at what happens to estrogen at the same time. There's another little blip of estrogen here. Estrogen and progesterone spike at the exact same time in the second part of the menstrual cycle. Does anybody know why? What does estrogen do? It does two things. Okay, so it helps follicle and it helps endometrium development. So FSH stimulates follicle development. It tells the ovary, it says, okay, pick one cell and let's start making an ovum. Let's get that through meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. And it works with estrogen to do that. Okay, what does LH do? What does the last one do? What does progesterone do? Now, we talked about the fact that progesterone helps thicken the endometrium. But here's another thing that progesterone does, and it's so important. Because we know that we've got two ovaries, and we know that they take turns ovulating for the most part. Okay, 1 month it'll be the left one, the other month it'll be the right one, and so on and so forth. But here's the deal. In order to give that one egg a chance, okay, in order to give it a chance to actually get out into the fallopian tube and possibly meet sperm cells, we don't want the other ovary to start making another follicle just yet. So the second major thing that progesterone does, the first one being it makes the actual endometrium. The second one is that it prevents further ovulation.